Hello, and welcome to The Ripple Impact, the podcast where we dive into those fascinating small moments, big decisions, and unexpected ripples that create waves of change in brands, businesses, leadership, and in life. I'm Laura Barber, founder of The Ripple Impact, a strategy and storytelling advisory that helps founders and leaders build brands that are felt, not just seen. Each week, I sit down with bold thinkers, founders, and what we call wave maker guests to explore the ripple moments that shaped their journey and the lessons you can take to transform your own brand and your business. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Charly Young. In 2013, she co-founded the Girls Network, an award-winning charity dedicated to empowering 14 to 19-year-old girls from disadvantaged communities across England by providing them with female mentors and a network of professional role models. Charly was recognised with an MBE for her impact on gender equality, and now she's the CEO and founder of the Early Years Movement. Charly, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thanks so much, Laura. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. And as someone who is a professional mentor on your Girls Network program, I've personally seen firsthand the power of the movement that you've created and the impact that you're making on young people's lives. So thank you so much for that. But before we get into the Girls Network, I would love to start with those childhood influences and role models in your life that have really influenced you, shaped your life and your career, and got you where you are today.
Of course. So it's always wonderful thinking back, isn't it? Looking at your childhood and picking out those moments and seeing how they influence the person you've become. I spend a lot of time thinking about particularly female mentors and role models given the work that I do. And whenever we ask our mentors, who are your role models or ideal mentors from when you were younger, the two people that come to mind for me first are my grandmothers. So my maternal grandmother was a doctor. She was one of the only women in her medical school training, and she used to tell the story of how, quite a small woman as well, she would have to elbow her way to the front to get to the together to get involved. And I just, something about that tenacity and that drive and that hang on, let me get at it, has always been a real inspiration. And then my paternal grandmother was one of the human computers, so doing all the mathematics. And again, something about that striding into that intellectual space where I think from many people she was written out of that and people thought this isn't something that women can do, so confidently and boldly doing that. So growing up, I had these two really strong female role models in my life whose stories came to the fore over time, but really taught me that, do you know what, you can do it. Someone might tell you can't, but go on, why not? Give it a go. And similarly, I think my dad very much was of the same mindset. He'd always be out and he'd see a tree or a sty or something to like play on and he'd give it a go. He'd like try it. And so I grew up with the attitude of like, why not? Give it a go, try it. Something challenging me to do something, tackle something, try and fix a problem. And so I think that's really followed me through my life. Actually, I see a problem and I think, okay, there's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to be a solution. I'm going to give it a go. Why not?
Yeah. How incredible to grow up with such amazing role models and have those people in your life to really inspire you. Have they shaped the way that you go at things and the way you think about things? And did that lead you to the career that you've got now?
It's funny, isn't it? How much, has really done that and how much you look back and attributed it to it anyway. But yeah, they definitely influenced how I approach things. They definitely made me feel like, don't tell me I can't do something, because I bet I can. Yeah. But where I ended up with the Girls Network, so I was at an all-girls school for my secondary school, and I faced some of the challenges that the Girls Network faced about being expected to adopt certain behaviours, attitudes, have certain aspirations, So you've got to be quiet and pliant, you've got to aspire to things that are helpful and caring or creative. And that's not always said explicitly, but there is often that implicit message given by the things you're praised for or the role models you see around you. And I ended up studying sciences at A-level, which is not uncommon in an all-girls school. There tend to be more girls taking up sciences in that space. Yeah. But I still had internalized this view that if I didn't want to go into medicine, i.e. a kind of generally quite caring angle on science, and science was just not for me. And I sometimes look back and think, actually, I probably would have really loved engineering, but nobody ever suggested that was an idea. So I studied philosophy. I got drawn into the education space. And my mum was a teacher. My dad briefly was also a teacher. So education was in my veins as much as I think I tried to fight it for a while. And then I ended up doing the Teach First program and taught in North West London in brilliant school, but in a really challenging area. And, there saw very palpably the challenge for young people coming to school where they perhaps haven't had breakfast, don't have the right equipment, aren't in environments where they have necessarily those role models going to work and doing some of the things that they might aspire to do. And that was all before they even begun to try and engage with the curriculum. So contending with an awful lot. But then that double disadvantage where they were dealing with a lot of that in their lives. And for the girls and young women, they were not seeing women doing the things that they aspired to do. They were being told, you've got to be pretty quiet, compliant. These are the things you can do, and importantly, these are the things you can't do. And whilst a lot of their families were incredibly supportive, they didn't have the role models, they didn't have the knowledge, the access to networks to enable them to pursue the things that they cared about. And so I'd have conversations with them about what they wanted to do. And many of them could name those roles. They could talk about, being a criminal psychologist. There was a TV show at the time that was very big with criminal psychology, became a lot, or, wanting to be a doctor or an engineer, whatever it might be, a lawyer. But for many of them, when you probed a little bit deeper, actually there was a sense, or sometimes stated, it's not for me. People like me don't get to do that. This is what I'll do. I'll probably get a part-time job, start a family, whatever it might be, whatever it was, the narrative they've been told about what their role was meant to be in society. And I remember feeling incredibly frustrated by that. And probably partly because I felt perhaps there were missed opportunities for me when I was younger. But I related, I think, to some of that sense of being told you can't do something, actually having that drive for myself of going, hang on, you can't tell me I can't do something. And then recognizing that in these young women who I could see the potential. I knew that they could. Yes, there were more barriers perhaps than for others, but it was possible. And it's just like, that is just unfair. And it was that sense and that frustration and that sense of injustice, I suppose, that drove the initial founding of the Girls Network to say, well, look, we know amazing women doing a whole host of things. Let's bring them in, get them to meet these young women in our classrooms so that they can see what's possible. And that, a huge diversity of women are doing a huge diversity of things. And they can do that too. And it was in a couple of hours, just having one-to-one conversations with these women, that the girls in our classrooms started to see, okay, actually there is a link between where I am and where this woman is. There's a sense of possibility. Yeah. And I think it was that sense of possibility that switched something in their thinking, in their minds. And we just saw a real change in some of those girls and young women to start thinking differently about who they were and the futures that were possible for them. And of course, all the women were like, well, I was speaking to somebody and she wants to be a journalist and I've got this contact here, or my sister's a doctor, can I give her work? There was so much generosity of time and willingness to help. And we just thought, come on, if we can match those things together, if we can extend that relationship over a longer period of time, how much more impact could we have? And so that's where the Girls Network was born. And we started in our respective schools in North West London, and then it grew across the country, working with over 1,000 girls each year now. And it's just continues to be incredibly impactful. And a lot of it is about that mentoring. It's about sharing experience. It's about the networks that those girls and young women perhaps don't yet have and the exposure to what's possible. But it is, I think, also about someone choosing to invest time in them. Not a teacher, not a parent, not someone that has to, somebody that's choosing to invest time in them because it says something to them about their value and their worth. And that's a really powerful thing about mentoring, but particularly about mentoring young people.
Incredible. And what was the moment that you went from see such inequality and disadvantage and these girls holding themselves back? What was the moment that went from that to the speed networking at the school to then the Girls Network? Because that's an incredible leap from a small idea that became such a big movement. What was the journey that took you ultimately to the Girls Network?
There was a continued realization from the girls and young women in our classrooms. Like, once you notice something once, you see it again and again and again. It's like the yellow car phenomenon. You see one yellow car, you keep seeing them everywhere. And so we were suddenly really, really attuned to that. And it just gnawed away. And again, I think it's that attitude of, hang on, there's a problem, I can do something to solve it. Surely there's something we can do. And Becca and I were chatting and we were like, why don't we do this? Between us, we know amazing women. Let's just do it. And once that seed had been planted, we couldn't let go of it. And I'm pleased we didn't. But we were also living together at the time. And it was approaching International Women's Day, and we'd set up our Twitter. And I remember running between each other's rooms, being like, oh, we set up Twitter, our first post, because we were trying to find more women as it started sort of picking up. And it was just incredibly exciting to see the engagement in the real world. This idea that we'd had, this initial event we'd had, and then like testing it in the real world and realizing that more people were really up for this as well. And then it could be bigger than it had started just in our classroom. And then it just continued to happen. We just kept saying yes to things. We just kept seeing the impact and wanting to do more. And before we knew it, we were engaging with different schools. We both stopped teaching because it became quite a lot to try and do teaching and that both really well at the same time. And then once we'd stopped teaching, it cascaded from there. We were really fortunate to win Teach First Innovation Award in 2013, which gave us a little bit of funding. And then that meant we could really dedicate time to growing it and meeting the need that there was. And we were inundated with requests from women, girls, schools, parents from all over the country, indeed globally. Although Girls Network International is not there quite yet, but there was a big need. And so we kept trying to meet it.
Yeah, just amazing. And I remember when I signed up and I went along, and you start it with obviously you go through a load of training and obviously the DBS checks, and it's very diligent to make sure, because you're matching professional mentors with children, right? So there's a lot of diligence and training that goes through it. But I remember the first moment going to the school and doing the matching exercise and the networking with the girls, and you meet so many, because at that point you don't know who your mentee is going to be, and just meeting these incredibly passionate and ambitious and cheeky and confident and self-conscious, and such an incredible mix of girls, but had the boldness to sign up to something like this, wanted to get involved and wanted a professional mentor. And I just remember there just being so much energy in the room, and it was just such an exciting way to see the potential in a generation. And then of course I got matched with an incredible mentee who's been amazing, and I've learned as much from her as hopefully she's learned from me. But I just remember in the room just thinking, oh, this is such an incredible thing to be doing to inspire the next generation of girls and give them, as you said, possibilities and hope and support. And I'm incredibly honored to be part of it, because it feels like a privilege for me just to be in it, let alone what they get out of it. So yeah, it is a wonderful thing. And I came across it because someone I follow on LinkedIn is part of the Girls Network. And I was like, oh, that sounds really intriguing. What's this all about? I was like, I just have to get involved with this. So it is an incredible program. And anyone listening that wants to be part of it really needs to check it out, because it is such a beautiful program. And I will continue to be a mentor for as long as you want me. So yeah, it is an amazing program. How would you describe your tenacity to get you to that stage? Because to go from an idea and living with your co-founder and creating this idea to then an award-winning charity that is national, you've been recognized for an MBE for it. That is an incredible journey in the last 12 years. What were the big moments and milestones that gave you the tenacity to go, do you know what, we're just going to go for this?
Yeah, I think it's so important to recognize that I was fortunate enough to be able to do things like go back home and live with my family. Starting something up from scratch is really hard, and it costs money, and it's always important framing with that. But given I knew I had that safety net, and there is a psychological support that enables you to take risks in that space, a lot of it was being driven by what we were trying to do, like really, really believing in the cause and being able to see regularly the impact that helped keep on going when there were, you have highs and you have lows. And anyone that's set up their own thing, be it an organization or just running an event, whatever it might be, when it's your thing, you feel the highs so much more, but you also really feel the lows. Also, having a co-founder really helped, because we could go to each other and we could help each other through those challenging times. One of the big, apart from the initial injection of funding, which really enabled us to get going, we then got some funding from the National Lottery. They had a women and girls specific fund, and that enabled us to expand properly across the country. So we had previously been working in London and then down the South Coast. And for me, it was always really important that we were not just London centric and that we were regionally based too. And actually our ethos has always been being sort of community owned to some extent. We're a charity, we're not owned obviously, but making sure that the network was based in that community, and everybody, all the mentors and all the girls felt like this is ours, this is our community, this is our network. And that was always really important. But the National Lottery funding meant that we could expand into the West Midlands, into the Northwest, into the Northeast. And that felt really monumental, because we are taking this idea and proving it in lots of different areas. We're meeting different elements of need. We're learning huge amounts from that. And also the girls and young women in the program suddenly feel much more like a national movement, part of a national movement. At the end of the mentoring, they become part of our ambassador community, which is, I guess, our alumni network. And so where we can, we try and bring them together in their local regions, but also nationally. And we've had some national conferences. We held one in Liverpool Football Club, which was great. And girls from across the country coming there and seeing and meeting and getting to know people from different parts of the country and being inspired by each other is a really powerful thing. So that that felt like a really monumental step change for us. And that
Yeah.
ambassador community then growing.
And the ambassador program's even been to 10 Downing Street, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we've had a few trips to Downing Street, which has been great. Been into Parliament a few times. Yeah, they're doing amazing things. And, they're, of course, remarkable young women. And they've got opinions and views in the world that leaders are beginning to hear. And that's a wonderful thing to be able to provide that platform. Our vision's always been, it's not about us. It's about these girls and young women. It's about the future leaders and movers and shakers and entrepreneurs and teachers and lawyers, whatever, of the future, feeling like they have a place in the world. It's their world. They've got space to be heard and to shape this future. Arguably more important now than ever.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you see it even in the stats when people go into corporate lives. So once they've gone through education, they get to that stage. I've read things where men will apply for a job if they reach 50% of the capabilities or the skills or what's needed for the job, they'll apply. Women feel like they have to have 100% to apply for a job. So it happens throughout life and it stays with us. And what happens in our childhood is so monumental to the way people feel about their abilities, their capabilities, what they'll put themselves forward to, what they'll apply for. And we see that in organizations now. And as you said, like, it starts in childhood. So giving these young girls the ability, the capability, the networks, the connections, the boosting them up and giving them a platform is such an incredible thing to do. But you're actually now going even earlier, aren't you, with the early years movement? Tell us about the inspiration that's added that into your life.
Obviously working, so we work with 14 to 19-year-old girls at the Girls Network, which is real early intervention when we're thinking about what are they going on to do. So it's pre-GCSE for some of them. So it's time to really think seriously about their careers and what they do next. But as you say, these are really, really entrenched beliefs in individuals and in society about gender roles. And it became increasingly obvious to me that there was more work to be done. It was really hard to change some of those beliefs, even by the age of 14, when they're forming by the age of 3. We know that children have a sense of gender identity by the age of 3. It's fully formed generally by the age of 7. So there's that really critical window leading up to the age of 3 and then those early years where a child, whatever their gender identity is, and this is not about the politics of that, but however they identify, if they identify, I think I'm a little girl, I'm a little boy, whatever it might be, whatever that gender identity is, the minute they hear someone saying, girls can't play football, boys shouldn't cry, boys can't wear dresses, girls have to take care of people, whatever it might be that they're hearing explicitly or implicitly, they are immediately personalizing that and hearing, I can't play football, I shouldn't wear a dress, I have to take care of everybody else, it's my responsibility, whatever that might be. And so it dawned on me that there's so much work to be done, not only at the age group the Girls Network is working at, but actually at a really young age. And when you look at that age, and that's for all children. So when you look at that age, the key influences in their lives are obviously their family, their carers, wherever they are living. It is then the kind of nursery education setting that they go into. It's the content they're consuming, be that books, media, clothes, toys, and then it's wider society, but more uniquely their peers. And so one of the big levers that seemed obvious to tackle then was looking at that early year setting, looking at nurseries and seeing what's going on there. And there's some great research demonstrating what really good gender equitable practice looks like. But one of the big barriers is that at the moment, less than 2 to 3% of early years staff are men. It's a majority female sector. And what that is therefore saying to everybody in their children is that caring is a woman's role. And that does nobody a service. It means that men are being kept out of those caring roles, aren't feeling necessarily included or entitled or able or believe that they're not good at it. It means women are taking on that responsibility and feel that is their responsibility. And children are seeing that. Children are seeing, okay, as a girl, my job is to care for people. And as a little boy, other people care for me. It's not my role to do that. I'm making it really black and white. It's more complex than that. But it's a real challenge there. And we're also saying to society, the role of caring is for women. And by the way, women do it instinctively. It's not hard. So we're not going to pay you very much. It's not going to have a particularly high status, which is sadly often what we see in jobs that are dominated by women. And that's obviously not at all true. It's an incredibly difficult job. It's incredibly important and it should have better status and it should be better paid. So the work of the early years movement is to try and get more men into the early years, to demonstrate that men care too. Men are great carers and they should be in that space. And simultaneously to try and increase the status of the role, to increase the pay because it's such an important place to be. And then long term, hopefully that's going to have an impact on societal beliefs about care and therefore gender and gender roles.
Yeah, because as you said, by 14, when you're working with them with the Girls Network, they've had 11 years of formed view of identity, role, responsibilities, abilities,
Yeah.
opportunities. That's a
Yeah, yeah,
long time. Like
it
3 is
is.
an incredibly young age to form a sense of identity. Like
Yeah.
that's incredible. And you think about, as you said, from books to education to the people around them to the language we're using, even down to clothes. And it's an example that is always very visibly obvious because you have the pretty princess t-shirts and you have the launch a rocket. So, like, even in terms of the clothes that children are wearing, it's systematic in our society of how we almost create this sense of identity for children rather than letting them create it themselves.
Absolutely. And look, of course, between the ages of 3 and 14, identity moves and changes and shifts. Of
Sure.
course it does. But it's such a fundamental starting point that it can be really hard to shift. And if
Mm,
those influences are not helping you to feel like you can be whoever you want to be within that space too,
yeah.
that's a real problem. But I agree with you. I have a 10.5-month-old daughter, and it still really surprises me. We'll take her out for a walk, and unless she is wearing pretty much head to toe pink and flowers, people will say he. They will immediately, without question, assume he. And yeah, I don't particularly mind. I don't think she minds. I don't think she's aware of it yet. But I find it fascinating. And it's not even when she's in blue. If she's in green, if she's in yellow, if she's in something that feels very ungendered, very neutral,
Yeah.
society standards, it's still a
Wow.
he. It just goes to, and there's obviously no malintent either. People obviously want to
No,
be
of
lovely
course.
to a child. But it just shows you how deeply this goes and how, like, not even thinking about it, we just make these assumptions.
Yeah, and unwiring the language as well of even when children fall down and when little boys fall down, it's like, oh, you're fine, and little girls, are you okay? Are you okay? Like, are you okay? So
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
reframing the way that we treat children, the way we use the language, more neutral language for
yeah,
all genders,
yeah.
not just
Yeah.
stereotyping.
Yeah, and even when you're aware of it, like I have to
Mm,
really catch myself and think about the language I'm using to my daughter, and be
yeah.
really conscious of that. And we're growing up in a gender society; it's not gonna undo it, but it feels like little incremental bits that I can do. I want to.
So tell us about the early years movement in terms of the mission and what you're trying to do and what's your end goal? Because you talked about the Girls Network, right? And it started really small and it started in London, it went regional, it's now national. Do you have the long-term aspirational vision for early years, or you starting like you did with the Girls Network?
It's a bit of a mix. I mean, the long-term goal is hugely ambitious in terms of tackle gender inequality and stereotypes across society. But scaling that back a little bit, the focus of the early years movement is to increase the proportion of men in the early years, and ideally getting that up at least to double figures. And people talk about a tipping point of about 25%. If we could get 25% of the early years workforce being men, then in theory we can start to really shift beliefs and perceptions.
Yeah.
And we also know anecdotally that an industry with more men typically sees a higher salary, a salary increase. So that
Mm.
would hopefully bring that with it. Recently, the government launched a campaign to try and get more men into the early years. And so just some increased advertising in that space, which is great. It needs much more than that. So we're tackling, as we've said, these really deeply ingrained beliefs about who does the caring and suspicions as well. The reality is some people are suspicious of men wanting to go into childcare. And some men feel the status, the idea of having to earn a big salary, being the provider can be a real barrier to that. So there are a lot of things to tackle and unpick to start to get more men into this space. And there's some great work that's already happening. And Men in the Early Years is a platform that's been set up for a while. And there are lots of individual practitioners trying to do more, particularly men in the space, to say, look, this is an amazing role, come into it, come and enjoy it. One of the things that struck me in talking to those men is typically they've fallen into the role. And then once they're there, they're like, gosh, this is the most enriching, fulfilling, joyful thing I've ever done. So one of the things we're doing is running insight days in nurseries with some different nursery chains to invite men in that are maybe thinking about that idea, thinking about career change, thinking about education or giving back, saying this is what it looks like. Here's the reality. Why not be one of these pioneering men that starts to shift a number that has been pretty static for a long time?
Yeah, incredible. And why would you say that this is so important? Like, what's the societal impact of this if we get this right?
If we start having more gender balance in nurseries and gender equitable practice, we've got a mix of men and women, we start to make sure that children's biases and stereotypes around gender are tackled at that age. And therefore that's going to hopefully, and in combination with work that's being done at different ages, have a knock-on effect on how they view themselves and how they treat other people. So we know that things like violence against women and girls, the high levels of male suicide, these things are rooted in part in gender and the expectations about men not to share when they're struggling. Amazing campaigns from Calm and others to tackle that. So there are so many challenges in society that have a root in gender bias and gender stereotypes that actually if we can genuinely start to unpick this at its root, we will hopefully have an impact on that. So it's really important for everybody. It's really important to be able to feel you can be who you want to be. For children to grow up not feeling inhibited by their identity, but able to pursue the things they want.
Yeah.
To see really good relationships modeled. For all children to see men and women having great, healthy, encouraging relationships together. If you have that modeled in the early years setting in nursery, what a wonderful thing to be surrounded by every day, and hopefully at home too. But not everyone will have that at home. And so to have that in the early years setting, all of this is really good modeling, helping children to develop socially, emotionally, relationally, to build that identity of who they are so that they can be confident going into the world, being who they are and making the changes they want to, building a society that they want to see.
Yeah, and I feel like the ripple impact of that is huge because, as you said, generationally, and if they can start with that at such a young age, then the impact of that and how that can weigh through society is so exciting. But there's so many generational pockets of issues that are still around, and how we tackle that from grassroots up is a monumental challenge.
Yeah.
What do you wish businesses would do as part of this? Because it's, as you said, it is a massive, audacious societal impact goal that you've got. And to take that on your shoulders is incredibly amazing. But it's going to it takes a village, right? That lovely
100%.
expression, it takes a village. So what do you wish businesses could do to help support this?
Yeah, really good question. And I think the thing with this topic is it is a systemic issue, right? It's hugely complex, and therefore it has to be like a systemic response. It has to be individuals in lots of different spaces tackling it. The challenge with businesses is sometimes a business feels quite a long way away from 0 to 5-year-olds. So they are your future talent, but it's decades away. But there are lots of things businesses can do. Number one, to support parents to have a more gender equitable approach to parenting, to engaging in their nurseries and early years sectors. Number two, if you have programs to support career changes, or people approaching retirement, one of the spaces we're looking is men who have had a career somewhere are thinking about perhaps moving to something more purposeful, perhaps having a shift before they retire fully, and presenting the early years sector as an option for that, a way to give back, a way to be based locally. Also, something we're exploring is in-house nurseries. So we've had a couple of conversations with business to say, look, you want to get staff back into business sooner and for longer and throughout the week, and we want to demonstrate that a gender equitable nursery is a really powerful thing. So let's build something on site so your staff can have children there. They're more willing to come in every day. We can help subsidize what we're paying those staff. So actually we can offer a better rate, and then we'll be much more easily able to recruit people into that role. We can model what gender equitable practice looks like in a nursery. 50-50, men, women, use it as a place to nurture and train men coming through the sector. What an amazing thing that would be to have 2 or 3 to start with pilots modeling how impactful gender equitable practices and helping businesses to tackle one of the things that we're addressing at the moment. So lots of things you can do, but
you talk about gender equitable practices, and even in organization that comes down to language too, because we talk organizationally about the inequality in pay, we talk about the amount of women that are or aren't on executive boards, etc., that are in the pipeline also to become executives too. But it's also in the day-to-day language that organizations around gender, around equality, around people's roles, people's right to be in the room. And I've been told in my career is, oh, you look quite young, so therefore you won't be taken seriously. Or, well, you're a woman, so you're going to have to try a little bit harder. So it's how we systematically not just start from the beginning, but also try and fix some of these issues within organizations today, because it's live and it's felt and it's real, and we are starting to change, but the degree of gap is still really, really big. And part of it comes down to language, and some of it is unconscious bias, but therefore it's the language and how we pick up that and how we try to reframe it and show the impact that language has on individuals, yes, from early years, but also through people's careers and through their life, that really inhibits people if they don't have the tenacity and ability to go, don't tell me I can't do that, I'm going to go for that. It sounds like that's really driven you and your passion and your ability to create such an incredible movement and charities that you've done. But for the people that maybe don't have that confidence, if you're told something enough times, you are going to repress yourself and you repress your abilities.
Definitely. I think you're completely right. And I think language is so important. One of the perhaps failings in business when we talk about EDI, equity, diversity and inclusion, is having it as its own little box. And there's a temptation then not to let it embed through everything. So looking through all our policies, all of our processes, and thinking, how is equity, diversity and inclusion part of this? not a separate nice to have and not a separate, it is through everything. And language is a really good example of that. What language are we using that is inclusive, that is encouraging people to feel like this is their place and their space? It's been interesting thinking about language in job adverts, for example, and how we describe certain qualities, leadership qualities in particular. That's something I think came up a lot in business when thinking about trying to recruit women into more senior roles. So how do we describe some of those aspects and characteristics we want someone to have for a job? And is that putting women off because it feels perhaps, and again, it's playing into stereotypes, of course, but it feels more, analytical, harder. It's like, it feels like maybe someone that woman doesn't feel they are. It's got less focus on relationships and the more feminized characteristics. And the flip of that in the early years, what language we're using in recruitment for early years is putting men off because it's talking about the kind of softer, caring play pieces. And it's not talking about the, brain development and the sort of scientific, intellectual angle of the work as well. So in both places, thinking about language is really powerful and really, really important. And thinking about the environment too. How does the environment feel for different people? In the early years, what color are we using? Where are we placing toys? What is that saying about different preferences? And I guess, again, in business, what is that space looking like? How is it inviting everybody? How is it inclusive for everybody? Thinking also about neurodiversity here, about physical accessibility. We need to feed these elements of equity, diversity and inclusion through all of our practices and approaches. And that's going to be really, really important, as you say, to tackle these issues at every level.
It's an incredible point about equity, diversity and inclusion not being this separate thing, because almost then that becomes like, you do unfortunately see organizations that it does feel very much tick box. Is that, okay, we need to do that, so therefore, okay, we've done that, now back to the day job. But what you're talking about is much more weaving it into the fabric of an organization, whether that's processes, whether that's policies, whether that's language, whether that's pay, whether that's environment, even incredible things like setting up spaces for women to breastfeed in the office. And setting up spaces for people to have quiet time, through to, if we don't fix paternity pay for men, then maternity is always going to hinder women in terms of their ability to have a successful and long-term career. We have to bring men up to the level of maternity and paternity support to allow women to come back into the workplace just as much as men can. And until we fix paternity, maternity will always be where it is. And this element of systematic change is incredible. And when we talked before, you were talking about, I would love to get every leader into the early years movement, get them to come and experience that. That's a beautiful thought. Can you tell our listeners the conversation we had about that?
Yeah, to get leaders who are particularly male and female, but particularly men who have perhaps felt like they've got to be hard-edged and like all these stereotypes we have about male leadership, to come into the classroom, to sit on the floor with some children and have a tea party, to run around with them in the garden, to laugh, to experience that joy, to think about leadership and development in a really different context. I just wonder what impact that might have in then bringing that back into the workplace. Obviously, the people you're working with are a different age. Not everything appropriate for a 2-year-old is going to be appropriate for the 45-year-old in your office. But
I don't know.
a lot of it is. We've spoken about this before. Like, actually, what works for children often does work for adults. Maybe different attention spans, but thinking about what's going to keep them engaged, thinking about joy, thinking about what they care about, thinking about them as human beings and their needs. Like, can you translate that into leadership in an office, and how powerful might that be? I think it would be amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree. What's been talked about quite a lot recently is this idea of human leadership and vulnerability and compassion and empathy. And there's a lot of traits that are very much that in the world of care, in the world of education, and in the roles that you've described, is that is really fundamental to the roles that they have, and bringing that more into organizations and experience it almost in the extreme, as you said, taking someone in a C-suite role, a male in a C-suite role, taking them into an early years classroom and getting them to experience the dynamic of that. Like, how incredible would that be to reframe people's perspective, and also for them to see the roles in action too?
Yeah, definitely. Highlighting the status of those roles as well. It may be, and I'm sure it isn't for everybody, but it may be that some people in leadership in the private sector don't really recognize what it takes to be an early years practitioner, carer, educator. It'll be incredibly powerful. Also, something that I found as a leader as well, we talk a lot about authentic leadership, and I think gender often gets brought into this. How can I be an authentic leader but also exhibit the leadership qualities I believe I'm meant to have without being a different person? And if you're a female leader, perhaps you feel like, okay, I've got to be loud, I've got to be directive, I've got to be really, really harsh, whatever I'm very, very conscious I'm talking about very stereotyped things here, but it is what influences us. So you might be feeling like that and then thinking, but I'm actually softer than that, and I want to bring myself to work. And how do I manage both of those things at the same time? How do I walk that tightrope between the masculine and feminine traits as a leader, because actually to be a really good leader, I think you need to have a toolkit of lots of different traits. And they will be a variety of things. And some of the skill is saying, okay, in this environment, what tool best suits what I need to do here? What tool best suits the outcome? What tool best suits the people here? Talking about human focused, human centered leadership. I'm thinking about the human beings that are here. I look in my toolkit. What do they need right now? Do they need direction? Do they need someone to stand up and really confidently lead? Or do they need someone to sit and listen and say, tell me what you think. I'm here to serve you. And sometimes it'll be different things, but if we can conceptualize these different traits as tools in a toolkit that we draw upon without compromising who we are, that can be a powerful way of embodying all of that as a leader and as indeed anybody.
It's such a beautiful thought. And you talked earlier about the language that you're using in advertising to get people into the early years movement. And I think what's so fascinating is that certain traits have been feminized or masculinized, if they're even words. But these traits have almost become female or male, and almost they don't have the ability to be for everyone. And I find that fascinating. If you say I'm a nurturer, that instantly people think female, assertive, male. I've seen incredible campaigns around, imagine a C-suite leader, and at the bottom it says, was that person a man? And it's how we take these incredible traits that, as you said, everyone should have this collection of toolkits and traits and behaviors and styles that they can flex and adapt to this scenario. But how we advertise jobs that aren't necessarily going to rule people out because of the language that we're using is a fascinating challenge.
Yeah, I think so. And as with many challenges and examples, you're kind of trying to change the system from within the system. So the reality is, whether we like it or not, certain words are gendered. And this is a societal construct, but they are gendered. And so acknowledging something is gendered and is therefore going to have a different impact on different people, whilst also trying to change that and remove the layer of gendering from it is really hard, is a generational change. There is, and I can never remember the two terms, there have been terms created to give to what we would call the more feminine and masculine traits, because they aren't innately for females and males, that remove the gender from it, but I cannot remember what they are called. But there have been attempts to try and say, can we neutralize these terms?
Yeah.
You do have to acknowledge that they do have weighting. It's the assertive versus bossy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And language being such a powerful and galvanizing thing, or such a damaging thing as well, because even traits like toxic masculinity have become very almost everyday terms. And you've talked before about the origin of that being actually something really specific.
Yeah, so toxic masculinity, and others know much more about this than me, including my husband, whose whole area of expertise, but was a term formed in prison and had a very, very specific meaning. And it has been used as a blanket term. And the problem is it associates masculinity with toxicity.
Yeah.
And that's not helpful for anybody. There are behaviors that could be described as toxic. And there are different ways in which men and women exhibit that. There are masculinities, and masculinity is plural because there are many different ways of being a man. There are masculinities that may contain toxic behaviors and very, very healthy and good behaviors within them. So toxic masculinity, I think, is a really, really unhelpful phrase. And we know that currently we're living in a world where there are a lot of men, old and young, that are feeling ostracized from conversations, are feeling like they are the problem. Problems everywhere, of course. Being forced into these spaces where they're therefore receiving really unhealthy, unhelpful suggestions, advice, role models. And actually, I think if we are being so exclusionary and siloed in our language, that's an inevitability. We need to have really nuanced, and the world doesn't like nuance, but we have to have really nuanced conversations. We have to be open to hearing people's experiences and recognize our hopefully shared ambitions, that people are free to be themselves, to feel loved, to feel valued, to be able to thrive and flourish. Of course, there are behaviors we will not tolerate, but that shouldn't be associated with gender.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm in the business of storytelling and human storytelling and how that helps business and organizations. And language is such an essential part of storytelling. And if we can try and improve it, and as you said, remove the gender from it, I don't know how we do that, but wow, what an incredible impact that would have on people, to give people possibilities, to remove the self-doubt, to remove the, oh, that doesn't sound like me, so that people can step into these roles, into leadership, into jobs, into the early years movement, and make that a systematic change. Is such an incredible thought.
When we think about language and having the right impact on the people we're trying to attract, it can sometimes be really hard to use effective language or think about what language we should use, because we're coming from our own perspective and we probably use the language we think is appropriate. So identifying who we're trying to attract and actually asking them, how does this language land with you? How does it make you feel? What words do resonate with you? Engaging with people that we are trying to attract, retain, whatever it might be, is a really helpful way of thinking about how we change our language, because it can feel a bit of a minefield otherwise.
Yeah, and it's such an important thing for businesses, understanding your audience, who's your who, and really understanding them deeply so you can connect, because some language will be so deeply powerful and some is going to instantly turn them off and just distract them. So yeah, that's so powerful. What future ripples do you think we need to look for in gender, in leadership, in education? Big question, I know.
Massive question. I think future ripples in gender, in fact, gender education, the whole lot, we need a lot more joined up systems thinking approaches to some of the biggest challenges we're facing. Early years practitioners need to be talking to school leaders, need to be talking to health visitors, need to be talking to politicians, to business leaders, to the media. We held an amazing roundtable back in the early summer and brought together business, policy, funders, early years practitioners, experts in masculinities to talk about the shared problem of men in the early years. And there are so many examples of that where if we continue to operate in silos and don't recognize we are all part of an ecosystem, we're only ever going to have incremental change. Understanding where the power is held, where the money is held, where we have shared interests can be the key to unlocking some of the really, really big problems we're seeing in society. We talk about mental models and systems change. So what are the beliefs that we so fundamentally hold? We talk about power dynamics, resource dynamics, policies and infrastructure that holds inequality in place. So to be able to understand all of that is what is needed to shift gender biases and gender stereotypes, to shift the education gap that we see across the education system. If we can't take that lens on it, we're just going to chip away at it.
Yeah, and this idea of a systematic challenge needs a systematic approach, right? And it needs everyone to have skin in the game and see the tension, see the issue, and really support the cause and get behind it to make the change and make the difference. It's already been such an incredible conversation, and people, I hope, will take so much inspiration out of this. But to try and crystallize it, what advice? So we call our guests wave makers because they're making incredible waves on the industry, on society, in culture, and obviously you've been recognized for that, which is really inspiring. So thank you for the work that you've been doing. What advice would you give to aspiring wave makers? So whether that's someone to set up their own cause, has their own purpose, maybe they're a business leader, maybe they want to go into early years, what advice would you give to people?
The advice I always give when speaking to particularly entrepreneurs with an idea in social sessions and similar is, if you've got an idea, if you've got a burning problem you want to tackle, you've got a burning question you want to pursue, whatever it is, know what that is and hold on to it really tightly, because that is your passion and that is your drive and that is the thing that's getting you up in the morning. It's going to keep you going. But then everything else around it, your views about what that might look like, how it's going to work, hold on to it really loosely, and then have conversations, speak to people that are in that space, speak to people that aren't in that space, and let those conversations help shape what that looks like. And that, to me, I think is a really powerful way of taking a really important idea and making it and shaping it to fit the world you're in and to fit the problem you're addressing, and to bring people on the journey with you. We've talked about not being able to do it in silos in terms of structures and institutions, but it's also true about individuals. You need people around you. You need your boardroom. We talk about, who are the people that are going to challenge you? Who are the people that are going to support you? Who's going to pick you up when you're feeling down? You need those people around you to help you keep on going and to have the impact that you want to have.
I love the thought of hold on to your vision tightly, but hold on to how you actually get there very loosely. So that's such a wonderful thought. I love that so much. Charly Young, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, from strong, incredible female family influences in your grandparents to pioneering and mentoring young women through the Girls Network, and now breaking biases in nurseries and beyond through the early years movement. Your story shows how ripples can start really small in founder bedrooms and in classroom conversations, to single mentoring moments that can actually create huge waves in society, transforming thousands of lives and for generations to come. So thank you so deeply for your fantastic work. And for our listeners, the lesson is clear: never underestimate the smallest spark that can transform systems, generations, and the way we live. If you're looking to elevate the human storytelling of your brand and business and get in the right language, which we've talked about today, then do get in touch with us at the Ripple Impact. Please check out the Girls Network and sign up if you want to be an incredible female mentor, because I can personally say how incredible that program is. That is a wrap on this Ripple episode. Tune in weekly for more bold voices and inspiring wavemaker guests. Charly, thank you so much for today. It's been really inspiring to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much. I'm Maura Barber. This is the Ripple Impact. We will see you all next week. Thank you, Charly, so much. Bye everyone for now.